Hello, and welcome to this 4th of July edition of the Purple Journal podcast. You know it's going to be a good show when I literally had no title in mind.
Joe, it sounded like a cherry bomb went off in your office there with that hello. My goodness.
That had some gusto.
I'm glad to be back. I missed you guys.
Hey.
You know, the season is creeping up on us. Training camp can't get here soon enough. There's at least some news for us to talk about, thankfully. But before we do that, I should probably remind people who we all are. I'm Joe Johnson, owner of purplePTSD.com and VikingsTerritory.com. Here with Mr. Joe Oberly, who writes for Purple PTSD, Vikings Territory, the sporting news, and is apparently living it up. Oh yeah, the Sports Post. Sorry, see, rusty. I was gonna say you're at your cabin, living the dream.
Yeah, I've been working my tail off for 3 days trying to get it ready for all the relatives coming out tomorrow. So it's not exactly what I used to dream about, but I'm not complaining.
So I still need directions.
Okay, we'll get those to you.
I'm part of. All right, I'll check the mail. Luke Braun's here too, which is a good thing because he could drop dead of heat stroke at any given moment.
I'm drinking water now.
That'll
Luke writes for Purple PTSD, Vikings Territory. He co-hosts the Pocket Protectors podcast on the Climbing the Pocket network, and he lives in Los Angeles, where apparently it is as hot as the surface of the sun.
It's about 7 p.m. here now, and it's about 100. It's fallen to 110.
Oh
wow!
So here's
peaked
my
at about 117.
Good thing you have an ocean nearby.
I don't. I live in the valley. The ocean is like an hour away.
It's a problem.
What does that feel like when you go outside? I mean, is it like you kind of alluded to this off air, but it seems like maybe it's too hot to even be humid. It like burns up all the.
Well, it's a desert. There's no moisture anywhere.
That's true.
Like the valley, the San Fernando Valley, the big desert basin. It's like, I mean, you've gotten in a hot car before, right? It's like that, but outside.
Ugh. That sounds awful. Well,
I'm reminded of that old comedy routine. What's his name? I can't remember. The short guy who would scream.
Bobcat?
No, not him. The funny one.
Sam Kinison.
Sam Kinison.
The funny one.
And he would say, talking to the people over in the Middle East, you live in a flippin' desert. Come to where the food is. One of the best. I saw him live at the Guthrie. It was incredible. The guy was hilarious. Anyway, I digress. Luke, you live in a desert. Come to where the air conditioning is.
There you go.
I do have air conditioning, but it's
That's
super
good.
loud. So, listeners, I'm doing it for you. I'm sweating for you.
If you hear a loud thud and then heavy breathing, that's just Luke resetting, power cycling his brain. But yeah, let's get into some of the more recent news, and then we can talk about some of the blatantly obvious let's get training camp started news items where people are literally scraping the bottom of the barrel. I think the biggest news since we were on the show last, obviously, was the Danielle Hunter contract extension. And this is kind of a two-parter, as it's then kind of the onus fell on the conversation that a lot of people were having before the Vikings ended up getting Kirk Cousins, which was, who do you keep if you bring in Cousins? And it was there's a list of people. Hunter was on there. Obviously, it's fallen to the Diggs and Barr situation, and we've talked about Barr's contract a few times over the last couple shows. But I guess, Luke, to start out, what did you think of the deal Hunter got, and how do you, and obviously for both of you guys, how do you feel that impacts the Barr Diggs situation, and then we can kind of delve into that a little bit more.
Yeah. In short, we paid him less than he's worth. We got a good deal.
Yeah.
Part of that is because we guaranteed more than half of his contract, which is not common for defensive ends, and that lets you kind of say, hey, we'll guarantee you a lot more if you let us take the overall number down so that we can fit all these other people in. And that's probably how the negotiation went, which is something that Brzezinski's been doing a lot. He did it a little bit with Cousins. He did it less with Richardson, because Richardson was just 1 year, but he did it with Eric Kendricks too. And hopefully we'll be able to do the same thing with Diggs and Barr. But because both Kendricks and Hunter are making smaller base amounts than everybody thought, it means that you can fit both Diggs and Barr in without working all that hard. You still have to get decent deals. You can't just give Diggs and Barr both huge. You can't give Diggs $19 million a year, and that would put you right back behind the 8 ball. But it makes it possible to do both of them pretty reasonably.
That was my take on it. I thought, there hasn't been as much. There's certainly been plenty of hand-wringing out in the Vikings fandom world about getting all these guys in, and I think, but I've never seen any really concern coming out of Winter Park or any indications that they weren't going to, put their best foot forward and try to sign them all. And I think you hit it on the head, Luke. That this allows them all the contracts that Brzezinski has been putting together, and he is their wunderkind when it comes to the salary cap.
Totally,
it allows them to get some of these other guys, and that's if they've said all along that these guys are they've wanted to build together with this team and bring these guys up, and they've got the great nucleus, and if that's the case, then they have to sign these guys. I know I'll get to this later. I started reading Luke's piece on the linebackers today, and I thought, should we be concerned that there's some other linebacker coming up that they can say, well, we don't want Barr to have to pay him that much money. We'll get Diggs and Barr but I don't think. Yeah, exactly. So, I think you're right. I'm more heartened than I was that they're going to get all these guys on contract and under the salary cap.
I will say, I just saw this. Jason from Over the Cap, who'd probably been to his website during the whole Kirk Cousins moment. People, after he signed, people asked him hey, can they afford these 4 players? And he said they can probably afford 3, and he's a pretty good source for that. But he was also projecting Danielle Hunter to make about $3.5 million a year more than he's making now. Somebody actually just asked him, Can the Vikes afford to pay both Diggs and Barr? And he just said yes. So.
Yeah, I was going to say Suhan was talking about this, and he said that Brzezinski did his undergraduate at Hogwarts, which I thought was a good take. And I wonder if he deserves some more credit for everything that's going on with this team. And Luke, you kind of alluded to it. I know that they've gotten not necessarily lucky, but they've done things like locking in Thielen before his monster season to 4 years, $19 million, which obviously helps them in the current situation.
That also comes down to good recognition talent by the team in order to do something like that you think is capable of that. But I mean, they've tried in the past to not let Brzezinski go elsewhere and interview, haven't they? I think they really know what they got there. As far as giving him credit, he is he's a mastermind there. I believe there was someone that was wanted to interview him for some kind of GM job or something, and they might have denied them that ability. If I'm remembering correctly, I'm not sure.
They've definitely done that with George Patton.
Yeah.
Every year.
And that kind of ties into also, first let's just do the easy and lazy argument before we transition to something else. With the, let's say they had to choose between Diggs and Barr. I think Suhan put it out as the way he laid it out was one guy's maximum effort and the other guy has a reputation for perhaps not always giving his best, and that's kind of what it boiled down to for him. And obviously we've kind of established that that's probably not going to happen. But if you had to make that choice, a gun to your head, which one would you take, Joe? And then Luke.
Yeah, I read that article, and it's a great question. As I recall, I mean, there's a whole thing. They talk about receivers, are not a dime a dozen, but you can always get good receivers in the draft. They're always coming up, and a guy plays the linebacker position that has Barr's talent is tougher to find. But when I'm a big guy on attitude, and I'm not gonna rip on Barr. I mean, he has gotten tweaked by his coach in the past, and that whole celebrated thing. And Diggs is the polar opposite when it comes to attitude. This guy wants to get better, works his tail off to get better. He's got the whole injury problem. Well, so does Barr, for that matter. It's really a pick-em, and I think if I were to in my head, I'd have to go Diggs because Joe ultimately I'm a receiver guy.
Hey,
it's I like Suhan's reasoning, for picking Barr, because you want that nucleus of that defense together, and I think even though he's not the same kind of guy, he's a little more quiet, a little more to himself than Diggs. Diggs is a high energy and a face of the team and that kind of thing. I don't know. It's a tough call. I do not want to see Barr go by any stretch of the imagination. There's nothing that he's done that wants me to see him gone. But if I have to pick one, I think I'd go with Diggs.
Ooh.
I agree. I'd go with Diggs.
Yeah.
I was asked this question on Twitter, and I think my answer was something like, I'd go with Diggs, but I'd move mountains to get them both. Because they're both really important, right? But if I had to choose, for one, wide receivers are more important than linebackers. There's a lot of data to support that.
Yeah.
And also, Diggs has been more consistently good than Barr has been. Barr did have this crazy down year, and even in 2017 he had up games, and he actually did. He had more up games than down games, but he had more down games than Diggs had. And I actually think, maybe this is a hot take, but I actually think that Barr's injury history is more worrisome than Diggs. Diggs is going to miss a game or two, and that doesn't bother me very much, but Barr has lingering injuries that could turn into big giant spells of missed time, and that's more of a liability to me.
And it seems to, like you said, Diggs misses time, but then when he comes back, he seems to be Diggs. There was the down year you guys talked about, and kind of after the fact it came out that he was injured, or maybe he was playing tentative because he was coming off an injury. It seems like you said, they linger, but they also affect him when he plays.
Yeah, and I'm sure Diggs is better healthy than when not, but the Diggs' injury thing comes from, I absolutely believe this. Eric Thompson from Daily Northman tweeted this out earlier today. I totally believe that the whole thing comes from Diggs' fantasy owners, who he's questionable every week, right? But he usually plays. He only actually sits out a game or two a year. But he's questionable all the time, so he's really hard as a fantasy asset to use.
Percy
so people
Harvin.
are wow, I don't trust him. He's questionable all the time.
Yep, it's Percy Harvin. That's a good point. Oh God, I just lost what I was going to say.
But he plays through it.
Do you think that if Barr were to leave, that affects how Kendricks plays? Because these guys have been side by side for years, before they even got to the Vikings, and they know what the other guys each other's going to do. That's a heck of a tandem to bust up. That's a I think I don't know. I don't know how much that plays into it. You can put someone else
Barr
in there.
plays in term. Yes, I absolutely agree with you that it would hurt Kendricks, because for one, they both play a role that they rely really heavily on each other. So you could see play. They'll pass people off in the middle of the field and stuff, and they're really, really good at that. And if you have somebody who's not as good at that, it could, makes Kendricks' job harder. But also just Anthony Barr is so rangy, and he's so good at, he can line up right on the line of scrimmage, blitz from any gap, and then also back off from any gap into his zone and coverage and actually make it there. Not to mention he he's improved in coverage since the disaster of 2016 and stuff. Like, he is an excellent player and an extremely important piece to the defense. Even though linebackers tend to not be as important to defenses, I think Barr is more important to the Vikings than most linebackers are to their defense. So it's really important to lock him up. Gun to your head, I'm taking Diggs, but we got to keep Barr.
Yeah, I think my rationale would be, what would the net result be? I think the defense could absorb that easier than the offense could absorb losing Diggs. And I know that, Joe, you said that there are good wide receivers in the draft, and every episode I have to bring up my hatred of the picks that the Vikings have made since Randy Moss left. It just seems like that's easier said than done. Outside of the fact that apparently, and talk about a amazing segue, apparently this Treadwell talk seems to be building week to week with, we've kind of gone from, we talk about him all the time, and it seemed like, we were kind of talking about, he's getting a lot of first-team opportunities, and maybe it's the offense looking at giving him one last fair shake and seeing how he works with Cousins. And it seemed to kind of transition from that to people starting to believe that perhaps the demise of Treadwell was overstated, to paraphrase
Mark Twain.
Mark Twain, right? Samuel Clemens, Captain Crunch. Yeah. So, what are your guys' thoughts on Treadwell, Joe? Like, do you buy into that from what you've seen or heard?
The only things I can say that I've seen is that he got a lot more attention from Cousins throughout OTAs and minicamp, and I couple that with the fact that it is a huge year for him. I think if he doesn't, bust into that starting lineup this year, he's gone. So they're giving him a shot. He was the number 3 receiver, onto the field after the 2 tight ends change. They start with 2 tight ends and they pull one out and put him in, and so he's getting the opportunity. He's had the opportunity in the past, but not the same as he's getting now. So I think it's a big year. I don't know if you're asking me if it's warranted, if he's going to turn the corner. I don't know. I wouldn't bet the farm on it. I wouldn't bet any Bitcoins on it. I wouldn't bet any. Can you bet Bitcoin? I don't even know.
Not yet.
But
give it time.
So I
need an onion router or whatever you do.
I want to see more from him, and I want to see more from part of me thinks it's maybe Cousins knows where he's going to be. He's not going to. He's the third guy in coverage, and he knows where he's going to be, and he's kind of a safety valve as he's learning the offense too. So, give him a camp together. I'll ask him this after camp, and I'll maybe be able to say more. But I don't know. He's got to show a lot.
I don't think he's getting a second contract or even a 5th-year option. I think it would take it would take a Nelson Aguilar-sized renaissance for him to get his 5th-year option, which means he's here for this year, he's here for next year, and then he goes off into free agency to whatever his next chapter is. And I think it would take a pretty seismic event for anything else to happen. But while he's here, what he produces could definitely be influenced by Kirk Cousins, who, I think I've said this on the pod before, makes full field reads, which Case Keenum did not do. There's actually a great thread from Matt Waldman from Twitter that breaks down a lot of interesting stuff about Laquon Treadwell, and what I noticed most about it is that his fundamentals improved a lot from his rookie year. He was releasing off the line a lot better, his breaks were a lot better, but basically the conclusion of that was you have to throw at Treadwell even though he's covered, and you have to trust him to do that, and Case Keenum and Sam Bradford didn't trust him, so we'll see if Cousins is any different. But I think it would take approaching a 1,000-yard season for him to get a 5th-year option at this point, and I just don't see that happening.
Yeah, you have to think of it, and we've talked about this before too, but it boils down to just realistically, barring some sort of injury, how many?
That's what it would cost.
How many balls can he get between Diggs, Thielen, Cook, and Kyle Rudolph? I got to interview Kyle Rudolph at his youth camp at the TCO the Saturday before last, and asked him a couple questions about, some of the stuff that's been out there about him lining up out wide against corners and doing 2 and 3 tight end sets with DiFilippo, and he was legitimately excited about some of the stuff he's seen and how different things are going to be. So you have to think that, Rudolph brought up what the Eagles did in that regard, and throwing that into the offense. Obviously, I've seen people predicting stuff like Cook could have 1,000 and 1,000 season just from all the passes that he's getting. It's actually somebody who's going to be in our fantasy football league internally, so I totally know who they're drafting already.
I love that.
Yeah. God, how amazing would that be? I got all frothy when he said it, even if it's not going to happen. I like the idea of it, but yeah, it just seems like he's, I know Cousins spreads the ball around a lot more, but he can only get so many passes between all those guys. And that was one final thing, because like Joe, I love wide receivers. One of the talkers that was going around since our last pod was the Diggs versus Thielen argument, and it's interesting the different takes people have had. I know that I think it was the Sporting News, which is where I got the confusion earlier, with Joe listed Diggs as the 10th best wide receiver in the NFL, but then when you obviously you look at the differences between him and Thielen, not just even removing the injuries from it, I don't think Diggs has ever had more than 80 catches. He's never broke 1,000 yards. So you look at that, and then it's they're both amazing, and it's a hard question.
It's a silly question, but that's fine.
Yeah.
No offense to you. I don't mean to say it to you, Joe.
I know.
God, they're both excellent players. They both have different skill sets. They're both needed for this team. I think the fact that they do have slightly different skill sets and they complement each other well. I think if you take one or the other out of the equation, you might not, kind of like Barr and Kendrick, they might not be as good. I don't care who's better. I really don't. I guess from a fantasy standpoint, I'll take whichever one's there available to me, because I'm going to get one of these Vikings wide receivers on my team. Just mark that down right now, Joe. So
I'm keeping track. I can't lose again.
You what?
I said I can't lose again. / I can't let you win again. That's more important to me than winning myself.
Anyway, I think they're really good players, and I like them both, and I like what you get from them, and I don't care who's better,
So I'm gonna. I have a 5,000 word Diggs Thielen article I got to put in the recycle bin real quick. Yeah.
But I think it's a great.
No,
it's just not for me.
It's a total. Like I said earlier, we're getting into some takes that are like desperately pleading for training camp to start.
It is. It absolutely is that. I'd be curious to hear if Luke has any comment on it. But I'm just being a crusty old man. But give me one, give me them both. I love them on the team. I think it's phenomenal. And you can look at numbers. You can look at what the team have. Is Diggs somebody's favorite because he's the Minnesota Miracle guy? Whatever. It doesn't matter to me. They're both players who are always working to get better, and that's all I care about.
I'm not too far off of you, Joe. This is such a hard topic, and I think that's what makes it interesting, is because it's like really a tough conundrum to solve. If the team was in a situation where they had to, like, there's an expansion team and they had to give up either Diggs or Thielen, who would they do, or something like that.
Good point.
Yeah. It's interesting because it's super, super hard. I think I would lean toward Diggs on the basis of Diggs drawing more CV1s than Thielen did. last year when they were both they finally were both like respected as elite, but people still gave their best corner to Diggs. And that kind of allowed Thielen to really, really eat against some inferior corners. But a lot of that also had to do with Thielen lining up in the slot a lot. And you're not going to put, your Xavier Rhodes in the slot or whatever. Well, we did, but, your CB1 often doesn't go into the slot. So it's an interesting thing. I mean, ultimately, in terms of meaningful differences, there's not really. They both can line up anywhere on the field. So if you lose one, you're not losing that trait. They both have catch radiuses and separation abilities that erase inaccuracy. That is to say, you can throw a pass that's not very good and they're still going to catch it. So if you lose one, you're not losing that trait.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. I was just going to say they both have...
I was just going to say, is this a fantasy-generated question, or is it just a question that comes up because we're in the dead zone of the offseason? I'm just curious why...
I think that it was... I'm trying to think where it originated, and then it kind of took off from there. I don't know if it was fantasy-related as much as it was... I think somebody found it interesting, the discrepancy between Thielen's production versus perhaps Diggs's potential, especially in a contract situation, and especially with Kirk Cousins, and then looking at the Sporting News saying he's the 10th best receiver, and saying maybe Thielen deserved that, or why is he above Thielen? I think it was a combination of those factors that somebody just came up with the talker, and then everyone latched on to it. And so what I was going to say before getting back to Luke was just, I wonder if the question boils down to, I try to look at what does it boil down to? Does it boil down to production versus potential, or maybe the perceived breakout season Diggs is going to have? Even that's saying a lot considering what his production has been. But then people saying, well, he's never had a season like Thielen did. So yeah, I just think it was a interesting talker. But I'm wondering how not to quantify it, but how they're making that assessment. The Sporting News especially putting him up that high. I know he gets compared to Antonio Brown a lot, Diggs. And I'm obviously
we have Antonio Brown and Julio Jones. It's great.
And I write an article every week about how angry I am about the wide receiver position.
I know it.
If you're an offensive coordinator and you can do whatever you want, whether you have Diggs or Thielen, if you had to choose one of them, you can do whatever you want with both of them, and that's what's important.
That's a good point, and I think that's what's so exciting about it. I mean, they're not off the charts freakish talent like Randy Moss was, which is just spoiled everybody's conception of what a receiver is supposed to be in this town from the day he came to Minnesota. But they are talented. They are hard working. They are the kind of people that you want, and I think they complement each other. And I think any quarterback's going to love throwing to him, especially a guy like Cousins. He's going to dig having that many great options to throw to. So it's just exciting as hell. And if some Packer person started asking this question just to sow that little bit of dissent in the locker room, then I'm going to be pissed off. Damn. I'm just kidding.
Diggs is a better tweeter.
Well, everybody's better at social media than Kirk Cousins, because that grill picture made me question everything.
It looks like a human organ.
He's just a serial killer.
I
The
might move
responses
from Kirk
to
Cousins
that.
is a robot to Kirk Cousins is a serial killer. I might move from that.
Every response was like, "Are those rocks? What are you doing?"
They look like people's livers.
Oh God! I saw a chef actually break down what was happening, and he said that he was basically cooking these really thick steaks on the lowest temperature possible, and he said he was drying them out almost intentionally. He said it's the worst way to cook a steak. It was going to be disgusting, and it was just oh man.
I'm just glad if that person confirmed that it's not human. All I want to know is that he's not eating.
Well, no one's heard from him since, so.
No, he tweeted. He was like, "Why is everyone obsessed with my grilling skills?" It's like,
No, I meant the.
Are we in the
I meant
bar
the
that
chef.
all we have to know is that it's not human?
Like, listen, mess up your steaks. That's fine. You do you. It's America. But just please let me know that these aren't like cadaver parts.
Yeah.
Oh man, wouldn't that just bust Joe's balloon if well, I'm not even gonna say that, so forget it.
I'd still support. I'd
Vikings
still
quarterback
support
turns
him.
out to be serial killer.
That doesn't sound that far off from what we've dealt with. Like, I would hear that and just say, yeah. It's the Vikings.
Let's really clickbait this podcast and say the Kirk Cousins investigation edition.
Yep, deep dive. It's like that show Serial.
Sure. Luke's gonna have
10-parter.
numbers on the temperature that he cooks his meat at, and he's, oh my god, I can see it already.
So,
Here.
real quickly, we don't have to get into this too much, but I thought it was interesting, and the only reason I bring this up is because I wrote an article about it, and because I wanted Joe's take on this, because I had a general question about all the fervor that surrounded somebody, I forget who, it was a former wrestler named, like, Big Sexy, or something semi-aggressive like that, said on a podcast this week that Vince McMahon was talking about buying the Vikings in 1998 before Red McCombs did. And his point was that he was never interested in it, which Joe off air I think you kind of alluded to, and it was more of a publicity thing for him. But my question was, based on the response from people who maybe don't remember that far back because of all the articles that were written about it, I was like, how is that publicity if we're just now hearing about it? That doesn't make any sense. If it was, you would have heard about it back then because it's Vince McMahon and he's like Trumpian in regards to his self-promotion. And
Yeah,
so I was just wondering,
thinking,
Joe, if you recall hearing about that back then?
I do, but I was also thinking about buying the Vikings back then. So
Apparently everybody was.
It was, and that's exactly the case. It was very Trumpian. I read your piece, or I went through a bunch of it, and it's worth reading. I kind of liked it, but it did happen. I mean, he threw it out there in a very Trumpian way just to get himself some publicity at the time, that because Tom Clancy, the author of all these novels, I can't remember the spy novels or
Rainbow Six. There's a lot of video games now too. Rainbow Six is one of them, I think.
Very successful writer, and I thought to myself, well, guy, I mean, you write enough novels and you can buy a professional football team. He almost did, but he needed some people to help him, and he couldn't get it to work out, and he died a few years after that anyway. But I mean, everybody was coming out of the woods, and it was actually kind of embarrassing because so many people were throwing their hat in the ring, and I really think that McMahon was an example of that. You know, it made Minnesotans run to this, you know, those that aren't WWE fans or whatever, which I am not, you know, run screaming and say, oh my God, no. You know, and then for that brief moment, Red McCombs seemed like a savior, so you didn't have someone like that or Donald Trump buying the team. But Red McCombs is just the freaking worst. I mean, he was the worst, you know, you said it in your story, the worst owner of a professional sport in Minnesota, and that includes Norm Green.
I was going to say, I don't believe I said that in the article, but I believe that.
Norm Green was the worst, but he was good. And Red McCombs, there was no time that he was good. He was just trying to do it on the cheap, and just it's. That's what I recall. It wasn't a huge flirtation, but it made the news, and that's probably what he, did it for.
And Luke, you said too that you remember Denny Hecker throwing his hat in the ring, and then I recall, I'm trying to remember, who was the guy? I think he was from Arizona that wanted to buy the team, and then it turned out he didn't have the money for it. And it wasn't. I'm trying to think if he was if that's when the Wilf stepped in, or if I'm getting those two mixed up. I don't know if you guys even remember what I'm talking about. It was a black guy from Arizona, and it turned out he didn't have the money that he said he did or something, and then I thought maybe he still. That's when the Wilfs maybe came in, or am I'm combining the two? I don't remember.
It was a huge group of. They were trying to cobble together a group of owners to buy it, and I can't remember that guy's name, but he was
Reggie something.
Yes, Reggie. Oh my goodness, that's it. And he was one. He would have been the major owner, and he didn't have the money. And after his bid fell through, that's when the Wilfs came.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe. Is that your recollection, Luke? Or?
Yeah. Well, I'm not Luke, but
I barely remember this.
I will be.
So yeah, it was a mess of a time for the Vikings franchise. I mean, there's no question about it. You know, we had gone from the gang of like 31 when Denny Green had written his book about saying he wanted to buy the team and so they knew that they wanted to get a majority owner this next time, and my God, it was a mess before it ever, that's why, like I said, McCombs seemed like a great thing for the team when he first came in, but man, that soured so fast, and the crud he did to this team is, you know what, you make a great point in your piece that he makes the Wilfs look like, just the greatest owners in professional sports here in Minnesota, that's for sure. And maybe that's the line that you had.
Yeah, it was, and it was, I kind of alluded to something you said last show or the show before that, and I kind of prefaced it that way, that maybe my view of this is skewed just because I became more cognizant of football during the Red McCombs era than that compared to this, it's just so different, but yeah. God, those are dark days. The point was that, obviously I wouldn't, even though I think Vince McMahon would have been a better owner, which is kind of my clickbaity title, clearly we had to go through the McCombs era to end up with the Wilfs, and it was worth it, I guess, if you want to put it that way. But getting into the, it's clearly, again, for the fifth time, we're getting to the bottom of the barrel on off-season topics. We're getting to the prediction phase of the off-season where a bunch of statistics websites, betting websites, put out numbers, and, it's fun to talk about, even though, I don't want to say they're meaningless because you look at, obviously PFF has an amazing reputation, and what they put into it is interesting. And we had two talkers on this, and I think the best way to ask it is, I noticed there's a discrepancy between what PFF is saying in regards to the odds. So they had the Vikings, the odds of winning the NFC North. The Vikings 38%, Green Bay and Detroit tied at 23%, which I think is interesting, just because a lot of people are saying Green Bay is they're always saying that perennially, but Green Bay and Detroit are tied at 23%, considering all the hype around Green Bay, and then Chicago comes in at 16%. And then beyond that, I just grabbed the odds from a site called Odds Shark, and these are playoff odds, so they're a little different. But I think the discrepancy is interesting, just because they obviously do it differently. They look at how they're going to make money, not so much just the statistics of it. But the playoff odds for the Vikings are a minus 260, Green Bay's a minus 170, Detroit's a plus 260, Chicago's a plus 450. And then, just for a sake of comparison, the number one team is New England with a negative 1,500. And I admitted off the air, and I'll admit it on the air as well, that I have no idea what those numbers mean. I am so bad when it comes to sports betting. I really don't understand it. So I asked you, Luke, and if you wanted to explain a little bit what those numbers mean.
The plus minus is just if they say plus 260, that means that if you bet $100 and win, you get 260 back, and if you're minus 260, that means you would have to bet 260 to get 100 back.
Okay.
Or to profit 100, so you would bet 260 and then get 360 back.
It doesn't seem worth it.
Yeah, that's why. It's lame to bet on the Patriots to win the AFC East.
But that's different. Right.
Well, I was just gonna say it's better than the Timberwolves. I guess we have the 1 in 200 odds of either making the playoffs or winning the finals. I mean, granted, we know what's going on in the NBA, but the Timberwolves aren't that bad. I don't know. I don't know how you guys feel about sports betting in general, or these sort of predictions. I know, Luke, you're a little more analytically minded than me, which my dog is more analytically minded than I am. I don't know if you know and I know they say these are, obviously like industry secrets, but if you know kind of the method that they use to make those assessments, PFF, in regards to the playoffs.
So Eric Eager was one of the people who did this. He does the PFF forecast with George from PFF as well, and he does the pocket protectors with me. We talked about this a little bit on that pod. But they use their PFF ELO, which is basically their power ranking system, and they did power rankings all year and had us pretty comfortably or pretty consistently in the top 5, if I recall. It took us a while to get there coming off of 2016, but once we kind of shed 2016, we were pretty much a top 5 team throughout the whole year. And that translates over. And I think because of Green Bay, they are really the only advantage they have over us is Cousins versus Rodgers, obviously. Otherwise, they've got a lot of holes throughout that whole defense. Even though they had a good draft in the secondary, it's still a secondary of rookies. And that's kind of why they fall so much further than everybody thinks they do. Aaron Rodgers is going to give them a chance always. They'll probably be in the playoffs because of him, and they'll probably have a chance in the playoffs because of him. But top to bottom, it's pretty clear that the Vikings have a better roster. And I think just about everybody who does league-wide analysis, who isn't biased by the rivalry, agrees with that.
Yeah, I just, this isn't a hot take or anything, but I just get so irked by all this Green Bay stuff. Although I am loving a lot of this stuff coming out of there with Aaron Rodgers and some of his contract stuff and some of the moves they've made that have irked him. Any problems in that regard will make me happy.
Overconfidence from across the border, and then you can, the Vikings can win the division again and just shove it up their tailpipe. I mean, isn't that what you want? I let them talk all they want. God dang, this thing doesn't get won in what month is July? No, it gets.
What month is it?
That's
cabin talk right there.
That's right, baby. It's 4th of July weekend, so I should know what month it is. But no, I'm amazed at how quickly the initial talk was all behind Green Bay, and it has since turned a little bit more towards the Vikings when I think and people start really looking at it, and like Luke just said, their entire roster. I mean, that's how the Vikings have, that's how they beat them last week. You take Rodgers out of the equation, you saw just how how many holes in their rosters there were. They lost 2 coordinators as a result, right? As they both got fired and
a GM.
Exactly. So he was covering up a lot of woes, and it's still the case. I mean, they're going to be good. They're going to be good because they've probably got people in there that are better at their job than who they had. But if you have to look at it purely at paper, you really have to give the Vikings the advantage. And all that other talking is just goofy ass green and gold stuff. And so, who cares?
And I actually wanted to bring this up earlier, so I apologize because I am very into the series that you started this week, Luke. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but you haven't done this before, but I feel like you've done some interesting, maybe it was before the draft, similar in spirit type articles in regards to, and Luke, you obviously can explain this better, but he's doing a piece called The Vikings 90 by position, and it's the way you explained it I thought was really great because in your intro post, because you're looking kind of at the bubble players, and I think your point was that there's a lot more like human interest and just interesting stories there, and you're going position by position, you know. And
so this is actually my 4th year doing this series, but I just rebranded it this year. So before it was a position battle series.
Yeah.
It was focused on, you know, who's fighting for the starts and who's fighting for roster spots and blah, blah, blah. But a lot of the players don't really have very interesting position battle stories. Like a lot of players who are just camp bodies or who are just looking for a practice squad slot. Kind of found myself when I was writing it every year, like saying over and over, this guy probably won't make the team, but he's looking for a practice squad slot. And that's not very interesting. It's more interesting to know like where these guys all came from. So I kind of just rebranded it. It's roughly the same series and same content, but it's 90 Minnesota Vikings. And yeah, like you just said from the intro piece, it's kind of why I like doing it, because really we've got a lot of talkers this time of year of like who's going to start at wide receiver 3, right? It's like, well, probably whoever has the best preseason. Who's going to make the team between, you know, this wide out, and this wide out? Well, whoever's best in the preseason. And the answer is kind of always whoever's best in the preseason. And we could maybe try to predict that, but like it's 4 games and it's a weird exercise anyway, so it's just not very interesting to talk about. So I'd much rather talk about like who are these players, like the linebacker piece that just came out today. And there's 4 rookies and like a bunch of cast-offs, and probably 2 of them make the team. So it's, you know, it makes sense to get to know these guys and where they came from, and, you know, if they are an undrafted free agent, why'd they go undrafted? Is it just because they like weren't very good, or is it because in the instance of someone like Antoine Williams was on our practice squad all last year, and he got cut from the Lions because he was bad at special teams, and then we picked him up and put him on our practice squad. Now he gets a chance to make the team again, and he's kind of getting a redemption story. You know, or somebody like Peter Pujols, who was a good quarterback but played for Holy Cross. It's too small of a school, so he didn't get drafted. And every single player on the whole 90-man roster has a story like this, and they're all worth telling.
Luke, it's a great. There's a lot of really good information here. You know, for anybody that wants to get to know these players before camp starts, and then maybe have an informed opinion on who's going to do what or whatever. They're great. They're capsulized form. It's really good. It's informative. I was reading the linebackers piece today, and I learned quite a bit myself. So it's well worth it to check it out. I mean, how often are you loading them up? You know, 1 or 2 a week, or is what?
Going every 2 or 3 days. I've got them all written, except for the very, very last one. I always wrap up the series by covering the specialists, if there's a kicker battle or punter battle like there was last year or whatever, and then doing a roster prediction.
That one might be over by the time you get to it.
Have we been around for 4 years?
No. I started doing it on Reddit. The first time I just did Reddit posts.
I was like, it's even worse than Joe's. What month is it? I don't even know what year it is, apparently. But no, it's amazing, and it reminds me of something that Joe said to me when I was starting out at Vikings Journal, which was, I don't know if it was in conjunction with this, but I remember it because it's one of the adages I use with new writers. And there's a proclivity for some websites like Deadspin. They're for the sake of being, I guess, funny, you know, or just in general with sites, they don't look at these guys as human beings, and you know they kind of celebrate this guy should get cut, not thinking about like, well, it could ruin his life, you know. And it was Joe, I think you said, you know, you know a lot of the players, and because I think I said something relatively in retrospect that was just a dick move about Patterson at the time, and it was something like, you know, these are real people and you can't insult these people that way. First of all, second of all, you know, you kind of look at it that way, and so especially with a team like the Vikings where there aren't a lot of openings, like the roster is pretty much set, like you said, Luke. It is super interesting because it gives you people. It adds a dynamic to training camp where, you know, even if you watch shows like on HBO, those training camp shows, just how awful that must be as a coach to have to, or you know, GM to cut some of these guys, and what it means, and it gives you guys to root for and stuff like that. So yeah, it's amazing. And it's on Purple PTSD right now. It's gonna be on Vikings territory I wanted to stagger it a little bit, just so people understand the difference between the sites, but it'll be kind of pretty much the day after. It's on purpleJOURNAL. Excuse me. It'll be on Vikings territory, but
Great camp prime.
Who would you say, having, not to spoil anything, but having written most or all of them, like you said, who is your favorite story or something that maybe people don't really know that you think they should know more about?
That's a good one. I don't mind spoiling because our podcast listeners deserve an exclusive.
Ooh.
I've tweeted a little bit about him, but I love Johnny Stanton. He is competing for the fullback job, I think, is how they have him listed. I'd be curious to see what they actually do with him in camp, because he's played quarterback, linebacker, and running back, which is quite the combination, and he blocked a punt once. And it's just this dude that's been all over the field, and I find that super interesting, and I love the like hashtag grit of just being able to like line up wherever the coaches tell you and being able to like do something. I really like Brandon Zylstra's story, but that one's been kind of told, local kid. His hometown is like gathers around the TV every Saturday? When does the CFL play? He watches his like Edmonton Eskimos games.
Spicer?
Yeah, Spicer, Minnesota. One from the secondary that's really interesting to me is the undrafted free agent out of Auburn, Trey Matthews. So this guy grows up in Georgia, ends up going to the Bulldogs, and playing for like his college hometown team that he grew up rooting for, ends up getting caught trying to double cash his checks from the school.
Ooh.
I think scholarship checks, but ends up getting caught in like a theft scandal. And that plus a couple of injuries, he ends up getting dismissed from the Bulldogs. Goes to Auburn, has to sit out a year because of the transfer rules, and then gets hurt and needs like double shoulder surgery. So he's like at the rockest of rock bottom. He's crying every day. He can't lay down because of the rehab from the surgery, so he like can barely sleep. And it's horrible. Dude pulls himself out of this funk, works his tail end off to get back into the swing of things at Auburn, and by his senior year, he's a leader on the defense and getting NFL hype. And most of that was sourced from an article written right before the SEC championship game, where he got beat by the Georgia Bulldogs, who had cut him and basically ruined the first half of his college career. So that is that story. Just the twists and turns of it are amazing to me.
I was gonna say it's like a movie with it could be a happy ending, but
because of perceived off-field issues and just stunted development, because he kind of the first part of his college career he didn't get to develop like everybody else does. He falls out of the draft. He ends up going to Minnesota, and he ends up staring at a safety group that's like kind of hard to bust into. There's a lot of entrenched veterans in the safety group. So maybe he's just trying to put out tape for another team, but I find that story really, really interesting. And even if it ends here, it's all worth telling.
There's a lot of research into these pieces, so it's well worth everybody checking it out.
And click on the links in the article if you go to the article and you want to read more about the person, because I usually try to only link to things that are interesting. I'm not linking to like their bio from their college that just tells you how many tackles they got. It's usually interesting pieces that tell you something about who they are.
Or like me linking to clips from old school on a regular basis. Yeah, I can't wait for camp to start. Obviously, I've alluded to that a whole bunch on the show, just in regards to content. And going over to the TCL Center the other Saturday, just being in awe of that. Luke, man, when you see this place, your eyes are gonna well up. It's so awesome, and just from an engineering perspective, just like the inside practice field, it's like a airplane hangar for the Spruce Goose, but bigger. There's the fans on the ceiling that look like the propeller from the Titanic that hit that guy when he fell from the... It's like... it is so freaking amazing.
Joe walked to the end of the thing and stuck his arms out like it was in the wind of the Titanic.
Never let go. That's what I said to Kyle Rudolph. And I made a one-handed Randy Moss catch in the end zone by the pylon. It was...
Nice.
I was sweating profusely. and I had to sit down for about 15 minutes, but I'll remember that for the rest of my life. We have a couple of minutes left, so I did want to delve into, and we've talked about this on the show, so I apologize if it's a retread for some people. But there was an article, and I didn't write down, I forget where it was from, that discussed, was it Rotoworld maybe? That talked about the Vikings, how they use analytics, which we've talked about. We talked about that actually, Luke. You went really in depth last time, so we don't need to do that. But I thought it was interesting just learning a little bit more about the structure of their analytics in regards to how many people they have. They put in quotes in their department, because there's only 2 full-time employees. Soon it'll be 3, and that'll be Luke. I guarantee it.
Dream job.
But it was I was interested because we haven't touched on this as much. It just talked a little bit more about like the internal stuff that they do, how they score players, the data that they have, and then I think it was one of the things that was interesting is that they assess these ranks obviously, and then they really don't go after players with a quote-unquote low hit rate, and I think that's probably why they've been so good picking up a lot of these defenders in, third, fourth, fifth round that are, first round grades that are the high hit rate. And so I guess, Luke, I wanted to just kind of get your thoughts on that, and then also I think I just maybe defined what the hit rate was. Is that based on...
Pretty much, yeah.
Is that what it is? Okay.
Pretty much.
And they said Thielen was the obvious sort of looking
exception,
for.
Yeah.
Exception, thank you, to that.
This was a podcast with Josh Norris from Rotoworld, who is A, great Twitter follow, and B, you should definitely go listen to this podcast if you are a Vikings fan. It's totally worth it. It's like 16 minutes. And he basically just recounts a conversation that he had with Scott Kuhn, who is the director of analytics. That, 2 employees and an intern is, actually one of the bigger analytics departments, and the Vikings incorporate analytics more than other teams, according to that podcast. And I buy it. Their methods have been pretty traceable. You can kind of tell that they have a formula. They care a lot about weight, and they care a lot about, athletic testing, and I think maybe production goes into it, although obviously he's not going to tell you too much. It mostly is applied to the draft, although in that podcast he also mentions the Kirk Cousins decision, and he gave a quote from Scott Kuhn that goes something like, if Kirk Cousins plays at the level he played in Washington, we're going to be successful. And that's what this I guess, formula tells you. They want to make something akin to a passer rating for every position, and not passer rating itself. There's a bunch of problems with passer rating, and Scott Kuhn himself will confirm that for you. But something where you can basically have a nice boiled down number, not even like a PFF grade, but just some a composite score is the way they call it, that can basically tell you how good this player is, or how good that you can expect this player to be within a certain margin of error or whatever. And that's kind of the approach that they take. And they've also taken that approach really aggressively into undrafted free agency, and we kind of have seen that in the last couple of years. We had 3 UDFAs make the team last year, and we're probably going to have 3 or 4 more this year. So they have in the draft a super specific athletic formula. Arif Hassan has actually reverse engineered it to a short degree to kind of figure out, and I don't think they deviated from what he figured out earlier in the year before the draft. And then they also have they're starting to apply it to free agency, it sounds like, but they're not very far with that. That's still kind of an unknown science.
Were you surprised at all to hear? Did anything surprise you from that in regards to what the team is doing that you didn't know that they were doing at all? Or was this all kind of common knowledge?
The Thielen thing was interesting to me, how much they understand that they got lucky. They were. It sounds like they're very aware that they would never have found Adam Thielen if he wasn't local.
Okay.
If he went to some small school in, say, Illinois instead of Minnesota, he probably would not be in the NFL, and that's kind of crazy. And actually, like the Mankato coaches were like, he's not NFL ready. Like they didn't recommend him, so they didn't go scout, and they never found it, and they only gave him a tryout, and that's when they found out that like, oh hey, this kid has something.
Wow.
Also, tracking. That's what's interesting too. The speed tracking, like what Next Gen Stats does, but they actually have it in practice. And they actually saw in Week 11, Terrence Newman hit a wall and they started limiting his snaps.
In regards to his speed?
Yeah, like you could like tell, and they also do that to like help figure out when people are coming back from injury, which probably contributed to the way that they approached things with Sam Bradford, and probably contributes to like when it sounds like people are limited and they're going to come in, but they like sit out one more week than we think they did. That probably is why, because they're saying, hey, this guy's not 100% yet. He needs more time to heal, and we can do that because we have a microchip in his shoulder pads during practice, so we can see how fast he's running.
It is so amazing. Like, I was watching a video, I think from, was it last season, maybe the season before. They were breaking down the 5 fastest plays, and Diggs was number 2 or 3, and he hit like 24 miles per hour by the time he reached the end zone, and it was like something that, Diggs doesn't get, maybe because he ran like a 4.65, and he gets a lot of credit for running really great routes and not slowing down during his cuts and stuff. But it's amazing to see like stuff that just blew my mind, because he doesn't have that reputation, at least in my mind up until that point, and what the difference is perhaps between like a 40 and actual top end speed. So it's amazing all the stats that they're getting from those microchips and what it means for the game. I know Joe, it's always a fun, and he's on his extra crusty cabin mode, and so I know that you've been silent for the last few minutes.
I love every bit I learn about it, and I love it learning it from this podcast, and I know the value of it. I can't grind on it, but I don't turn it away. It's amazing what they're finding out, and it's changing the game. It's phenomenal.
So we have a couple minutes left. I wanted to really plug Micah Tweeten has written for us for a while, and he is going to be managing a lot of our fantasy stuff this year. We always do an internal league, but we're going to be doing a lot more actual Vikings and general fantasy stuff, because it doesn't seem to be a focus of many Vikings websites at all. So we think there's value there, and he's put together I think it's like a 500 player fantasy breakdown that he's going to be releasing in the next week or two. Tons of content. We pretty much are confirming that Arif is going to be contributing fantasy content as well. Probably doing best waiver wire pickup stuff once a week. So that'll be exciting. We're trying to integrate some software where you can get all your stats up to the second on the site in regards to the players, who's injured at the last second, so you can you don't have to scour looking for injuries. You can just spend time on Purple PTSD and Vikings territory and get all your fantasy information, and then hop into our message board and make fun of some of the moves that we make during the season. Beyond that, I know Joe, you had an article that you wanted to plug. Luke obviously is going to be continuing to do his 90 series. But what were you?
I was thinking something offensive line related. Mike, I got a couple little sound from Mike Remmers at the last day of mini camp, so it's a little old, but just the whole idea where I think that guy's the linchpin of this offensive line. Look at, depending on where he ends up is going to say a lot about how this offensive line will work, and we'll see what happens. Haven't completely formulated it. I better call Luke and get some numbers on this, but I think I think he's going to be a very important player in how that line does this year.
Yeah, and my spoiler alert, the first comment on that article will be me just saying, ah! It keeps me up at night. Not gonna lie. But yeah, I think, when does camp start? What's the
You don't
first
a ticker
date?
that's taking off the days. Won't you Xing them out on your calendar?
I have one of those like Christmas chains you make with construction paper, and I'm taking them off. But I missed a day or two. I know it ends
purple
on
and yellow construction.
exactly. It ends on the 16th, so I'm just trying to think.
Late July, early August, I think, or not late July, but yeah, late July is I think the first week, but I'm not sure.
It's like the 27th, I want to say, is when the rookies report.
You know what would be fun?
I think that's right.
What would be fun, since all three of us will be there, and I have some off-air news in that regard, we should maybe try to do a show from camp. That would be...
Oh, we have to.
I know. It's just, I just had a flashback of me at the Mermaid and that plug-in falling out of the wall.
Oh, you mean I have to talk to you guys there?
Put on deodorant this time.
Yeah, I worry about the technical side of it, because me trying to live stream Rudolph's thing was an utter disaster. So I'm trying to figure that out. I don't know if we could do maybe like a Facebook or YouTube live. Might be easier than, I don't know. We'll figure out the technical side of it. But yeah, that would be super awesome. But yeah, I wanted to thank everyone for listening. Our show keeps growing. It's actually becoming an issue. It's intimidating to see how many people are listening to this show. I was testing my camera in the backyard, and I put up a live video just randomly on our YouTube channel. There's like 30 people watching me walk around my backyard. It was super creepy. So we're blowing up. We'll be back in a couple weeks, I believe, right before doing a camp primer, and then hopefully we'll be able to do some stuff from camp. Definitely check us out on social media. Check out Vikings Territory, Purple PTSD. Listen, I do want people to check out Tyler Hagg's new show as well, Hot Dish in the Fridge. It's like a show, not just a podcast, and it's really great, and it's going to be getting a lot of great content in the coming weeks as well. But with that, this has been the Purple Journal podcast. I want to thank everyone for listening, and we'll be back in a couple weeks. Skol. So yeah, I didn't mention